Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
I don't think we realize how much we take for granted some basic things in modern technology, right? The ability after the printing press and the ability, certainly now with computers, to be able to highlight different things within our text through bold or italics or different fonts or font sizes is something that we do all the time, every day, and we don't even realize it anymore. We're reading through something, we're reading through dialogue, all of a sudden we see something in italics, and our brain registers, hey, this is different, this is important. We should look at this, we should pay attention to this. In the Torah, it's a little bit different. Not only are there not different fonts, there actually aren't even vowels and punctuation marks, right? Which makes it all the more difficult to read. And we highlight important sections within our Torah in a couple of different ways. Most notably, we highlight it by the music, right? We know as we read through the Torah, there are certain words that have trope on it, that have musical notations, that force our attention to those words. We talk about it a lot when we get to a certain trope like a shalshelet, right? Which is a very long trope. And then we have to look at that word and say, well, why? Why does that word have a shalshelet? And there are different reasons depending on the word, right? So the most traditional way that we highlight things is through the musical notation. There are a couple of places for different reasons within the Torah where letters are either bigger or smaller. And it's a way to highlight not usually the word, but frankly, the letter itself. Because you want to make sure, for example, at the end of the Shema that we just read, the Dalid is large. And our tradition tells us it's intentional so that we don't make the same mistake that all of us made when we were in Hebrew school and mix up Dalids and Reishis. Because they look the same, right? And the word echad means one, and the word acher means another. We don't want to be saying that. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is something else, right? That's not what we want to say. We want to say the Lord is one. And so it's emphasized. But there's one place in the Torah that has a very unique distinction. And we're going to read it today. It's actually our first aliyah. And I'm going to have you open up to page 826 in your Humashim. Now, the words are going to be very familiar to us, and Andrew got off very easy today because he's reading this, right? We just sang it, verses 35, 36. Vayehi bin Soa ha'aron, vayomer Moshe, kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha, v'yanusu mesanecha mipanecha. We literally just sang this as we brought the Torah out. But I want you to note right above line 35, or verse 35, you'll see there's a little upside down nun that's there. Everyone see it? And then right after the end of verse 36, there's another upside down nun. Almost like brackets or parentheses. What's interesting is that's in the Torah. That's in the Torah. So of all the different places, these two verses are set off from everything else with these two upside down nuns in the Torah. And the question is, why? Right? Why is this section set off from anything else? And I'm going to ask for your input on this, right? The English, in case you aren't familiar with the Hebrew, it says, and when the ark was to set out, Moses would say, advance, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, and may your foes flee before you. And when it halted, he would say, return, O Lord, you who are Israel's myriads of thousands. Why, of all the different places, is this highlighted?
Well, I think seas of ink have certainly been spilled over this, and the rabbis, some decided it's actually its own book, but it got put into in Bamidbar, why? Well, that's a whole other situation. But the reason that some rabbis say it's bracketed like that is because it's a book in and of itself about this journey, about the coming and the going, and each of us is part of that journey. It wasn't their journey.
Okay. So Diana is actually quoting one of the opinions in Masechet Shabbat, right? In Masechet Shabbat in the Talmud, that says that this section is actually its own book. Its own book. And we'll get to the why of that in a second. I think it's interesting. But I'd like some other opinions as well. Michal. It may very well be.
It's very dramatic.
Yes.
It's talking about what Moses has said to God, which we don't usually get a glimpse into. Like, this is Moses speaking to God. We don't usually have an ear to that.
Interesting.
And it's very important for this particular weekend anyway.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting. So Michal is arguing that, first of all, it's very dramatic, which is why we use it in our liturgy, right? It's very dramatic. And it's one of the very few times that we can hear Moses speaking to God, right? And what he says in that sort of way. There are other times, but this is certainly a very dramatic piece. And it has nothing to do with, usually Moses is complaining to God about Israel, right? But yeah, it has nothing to do with Israel's behavior. Anything else? Why would this be bracketed? So what's interesting is, I'm going to come back to what Diana said, but the other opinion in Masechet Shabbat is, this is actually in the wrong place. This was put here. It belongs somewhere else, probably Deuteronomy, right? Probably Deuteronomy. But it was put here for a reason. And when they asked the question of why, they said, well, if you look at what happens immediately beforehand, and you look at what happens immediately afterwards, it's actually complaints. It's complaints. Israel is saying, woe is us, right? If you look at afterwards, they said, we had all these amazing cucumbers and all sorts of things in Egypt, and now we've got nothing, right? And the response is that the Torah wanted to divide between these complaints so that it wasn't just all about complaint after complaint after complaint, okay? And so they took this section from another place and they put it there, but because they knew it wasn't in its proper place, they divided it off with these nuns, right? So that's one of the answers. But Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, right, the author or editor of the Mishnah, is the one who brings the opinion that Diana said, which is, it is a book in its entirety. It is a book in its entirety. And if you think about that, depending on how you divide the books, we may not have 5 books of the Torah. We may have 7 books of the Torah. Because we've got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, the first part of Numbers, this little piece, the second part of Numbers, and Deuteronomy, right? If you divide it up that way. So the question is, what is going on prior to this in Numbers and after this in Numbers that would make us think this would be a great place for a division? more than just the complaints, because frankly, we got complaints all over the place, right? There's a lot of complaints. But there's something that the focus before this text and the focus after this text requires a division. And Rabbi Sachs actually puts forward a very unique view on this. He says, before this, the focus has been through the book of Leviticus into the beginning of Numbers on what? What have we been reading about for the last however many months? The Levites, the priests, the high priests, what goes on in the temple, right? What goes on in the temple, the priesthood, right? The priestly group, the Kohanim, right? After this, we really don't talk about the priests anymore. A little bit, but not as a central theme. It goes back to Moses and to the story of Moses. And Moses as the leader, as opposed to Aaron and the priests as leader. So what's the difference between the role that the priests play and the role that Moses plays? And I'm going to add to that idea Moses as a prophet, not a priest. Yes, he's a leader, but they were all leaders, right? If we had to categorize the leadership of Aaron, he's a priest. If we categorize the leadership of Moses, he's a prophet. So what's the difference between a priest and a prophet? Diana?
I think the prophet had more of like, I think the priests were kind of like the functionaries, and the prophet was like, kind of like the CEO, but with like, he had a higher connection, and there's one part in particular where Moses has this direct communication with God, and we actually see the dialogue, where that, like the part with Pesach Sheni, when they're like, well, what do we do? You know, we've been in touch with dead bodies. Like, wait, hang on, sit tight. Let me go ask God what we're supposed to do. I'll be right back.
So different roles. You mentioned that the prophet Moses was sort of like CEO. Maybe the priests are COO, right? They're in charge of making sure that things function, right? And the prophet is CEO, maybe, okay.
Different connections. The priests represent the people of Israel towards God in the sense of what their offerings, whereas the prophets receiving the word of God.
I like that. So the priest is about directing the flow from us human beings to God in how we worship, and the prophet is about God to us. Okay, I like that. Michal?
So the priest's role is more clearly defined and structured, whereas the prophet who speaks to God has to be able to translate to the people and interact with the people. It's a more creative thing.
Good. So the priest's role is more structured and defined. The prophet's role is much more ambiguous. We'll get back to part of that. Yeah?
So the priest had a lineage, and the prophets, I guess, were called upon by God.
Yeah. So the priests are all about who your dad was, right? Right? Starting from Aaron, going down. And the prophets were called in the moment based on that relationship with God. And it could be anyone. It could be any one of us. Anybody else? So here's how Rabbi Sachs defines it, or differentiates it. He argues that priests engage in rituals and rites that never change. Now, they change sometimes in the fact that we don't have a temple right now, therefore we're not doing it. But if we had a temple, the assumption would be the rites and rituals are the same as they were described back here in the Torah. Their job is a job of constancy. They oversaw the Ner Tamid, right? It's all about constancy. A prophet, on the other hand, has to be alert to the moment. They're responding to right now. And that may be very different than what is happening tomorrow or what happened yesterday. Moses' job was to deal with all of these complaints. Aaron didn't have to deal with the complaints. And was it they lacked cucumbers, and was it that they lacked meat, or was it that they lacked water, or was it that they were kvetching because it was too hot, too cold, whatever, right? Moses had to deal with that moment. And not only is this a statement on leadership, because I think these are different types of leaderships, but Rabbi Sachs then brings this into two different parts of our tradition. There are aspects of our tradition that are unchanging, that don't change, that require that priestly outlook. This is who we are, this is what we do. But then there are also aspects of who we are and our tradition that need to be responsive to the moment, to what's going on right now, which may be very different than any other moment, right? We are here today on Shabbat. You should know that the Orthodox rabbinate in Israel yesterday told everyone to stay home. That was a response to the moment. I guarantee you, on any other day, the Orthodox rabbinate isn't going to say, stay home from shul. But they had to respond to the moment. And there's aspects that we actually need both of those. And what's the nexus? How do we decide, how do we know what are the things that we carry with us, and what are the things that we need to be more flexible and respond to? Well, Vayhi bin so Haran. We look at our Torah. This verse, these verses that we say when we take out the Torah, this is our focus. This is our point of nexus. Where we come back and we figure out, thank you, where we come back and we figure out what are the things that are critical to us that we need to look at like a priest, and what are the things that we need to look at like a prophet. We good? Okay. The last thing I'll say is he highlights a difference between a Jewish prophet and prophets in other traditions, which I think is equally important and brings it together again. Prophets, when we talk about a prophet, prophets are there to, quote unquote, tell us the future. But actually, if you look at Jewish prophets, starting from Moses going all the way through into all of our prophets, they never say, this is going to happen. What they say is, this is going to happen unless. It's not a guarantee. It's a warning. The control of what happens is still in our hands. And when a prophet speaks, he says, well, this is what we need to do. This is how we need to think about it. This is what God is saying. And unless we respond the way that we're supposed to respond, well, bad things may happen. But if we do, we can adjust. We can take our future into a different place. This nexus right here is the point that allows us to do that. And it became such a critical part of our thought process, this moment between priest and prophet, that our rabbis brought it into our liturgy, and we say it every time we take the Sefer Torah out.